From the moment God promised land to Abraham, Israel's journey had moved through slavery, liberation, and wilderness wandering until it halted on the plains of Moab. Moses died there, and the mantle passed to Joshua, the one-time field commander who lingered in the tent of meeting and learned to listen. God's commission, be strong and courageous, meditate on this Torah day and night, made it clear that the battles ahead would hinge on obedience more than tactics, on listening hearts more than lifted spears. Joshua's first decision was to reconnoiter Jericho, the walled sentinel that blocked the route into Canaan's heartland. 2 spies crossed the Jordan by night and slipped inside the city's double ring of mud brick ramparts. There, hidden beneath flax on a rooftop, they heard a confession that would echo through the rest of the book. Rahab, a Canaanite innkeeper, declared that the God who split the reed-choked sea was sovereign over heaven and earth. She hid the spies, tied a scarlet cord to her window as a pledge, and became the first demonstration that lineage could not bar anyone from mercy. Her story foreshadowed what every battle would underline. Allegiance, not ancestry, decided one's future. 3 days later, the Israelites camped opposite Jericho as the spring flood turned the Jordan into a churning barrier. At dawn, the priest shouldered the ark, chest of covenant tablets, a jar of manna, Aaron's budding staff, and stepped into the river. The waters heaped 16 miles upstream at Adam, exposing cracked clay where the entire nation crossed. While the ark-bearing priests still stood in midstream, Joshua selected 12 representatives, 1 from each tribe, and ordered them to wrench water-soaked boulders from the riverbed. That night at Gilgal, the men stacked the stones into a circular cairn. The memorial carried layered meaning. It attached God's miracle to geography, bound the tribes together in a single act of remembrance, and provided a teaching prop so that children would someday ask, what do these stones mean? An invitation for parents to recount how the living God stopped a river. Joshua also erected a second set of stones at the very place where the priests had stood, now again hidden beneath rushing water, an unseen witness known only to God. With the memorials secure, Israel renewed ancient rituals of identity. Circumcision cut away the reproach of wilderness. The first Passover in Canaan celebrated deliverance, and when the manna ceased, the people tasted roasted grain grown in their long-promised land. Just before the siege plans for Jericho unfold, Joshua walks alone beyond the camp, perhaps surveying the walls at twilight, when he sees a man standing opposite him, drawn sword gleaming in the last light. Instinctively, Joshua challenges, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The stranger's reply slices through every notion of partisan warfare. "Neither. I am the commander of the armies of Yahweh." The Hebrew title, Shar Subah, Yahweh, names him the supreme captain of the unseen hosts that had encircled Sinai and would one day appear to Elisha's servant. It means the earthly conflict is only a skirmish within a larger cosmic campaign. Joshua falls face down in reverence, an action he offers to no mere angel. The commander accepts the homage and then echoes Exodus 3 by commanding, "Remove your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." The leather straps that carried Joshua through desert dust are unfastened. Bare feet touch consecrated soil as Moses once did it before the burning bush. Holiness is not tied to a mountain or tabernacle, but to the immediate presence of God, now manifest outside Canaan's most impenetrable fortress. The encounter reorients strategy and theology at once. Israel's general learns that divine allegiance cannot be co-opted. Victory depends on aligning with God's purposes, not claiming him as a tribal mascot. It also hints that Jericho's walls will fall by heavenly decree, not by Israelite siegecraft. Visually, the scene invites cinematic framing. Moonlit stones, a lone figure whose drawn blade glints like liquid fire, Joshua's cloak gathering dust as he kneels, sandals lifted off and set aside while silence hums with unseen battalions. The commander's appearance reminds the audience, and Joshua, that Canaan's conquest is ultimately the Lord's battle, fought on both earthly ramparts and in celestial realms, and Israel's role is to follow in barefoot obedience. Jericho's looming walls soon tested that lesson. For 6 dawns, a silent procession circled the outer rampart, armed guard, 7 priests with ram's horn trumpets, Levites bearing the ark's golden poles, rearguard soldiers, and the hushed multitude. Eerie silence replaced siege engines. Only the trumpet's plaintive bleat drifted over parapets where Jericho's warriors peered down. On the 7th day, tension thickened as the convoy traced the walls 7 times. At the final circuit, trumpets sounded a sustained note. Joshua's shout pierced the air, and Jericho's fortifications shuddered. Centuries of Canaanite brickwork crumbled like pressed sand. Dust roiled skyward. Defenders tumbled amid sliding masonry. Flames later devoured idol-filled storehouses, yet Rahab's home stood unbroken, a lone vertical stripe of scarlet cord against collapsing debris. Gold, silver, bronze, and iron were consecrated to the sanctuary, reminding everyone that victory belonged to God, not the plunderers. Fresh from triumph, Israel turned 12 miles northwest to Ai, a small citadel perched above knife-edged ravines. Scouts deemed it manageable. A light force attacked and fled in disarray, 36 men dead on the slopes. The shock exposed hidden sin. Action, drawn by the glitter of Jericho's spoil, had buried a Babylonian garment and bullion beneath his tent. His private greed fractured covenant lines. After confession and judgment, Joshua devised a 2-pronged attack. Under moonless sky, an ambush company climbed the western ravine and hid among scrub oaks. At dawn, Joshua's main body advanced from the north. Ai's warriors rushed out, eager for a second rout. Israel feigned panic, drawing them down the valley. Smoke soon billowed behind. The ambush force had ignited the empty city. Realizing their entrapment, Ai's soldiers spun between converging Israelite ranks. Spears flashed, shouts echoed. The king of Ai was hanged at sunset and buried under a stone heap at the gate, a grim cairn warning that covenant infidelity invited ruin. After Jericho's fall and Ai's reversal, word spread that Gibeon had saved itself by tricking Israel. Envoys wore tattered clothes and carried moldy bread, pretending to be weary travelers from a distant land. Joshua, without consulting God, swore them a peace treaty, discovering the truth too late. Enraged by this alliance, 5 Amorite kings marched swiftly to punish Gibeon. Joshua responded instantly, leading an overnight uphill march to confront them at dawn. The sudden attack shattered Amorite ranks, forcing them into chaotic retreat down the steep ridge of Beth Horon. As they fled, storm clouds darkened the sky, and God unleashed hailstones, massive chunks of ice as deadly as sling stones. These icy projectiles pummeled the fleeing armies, killing more soldiers than the swords of Israel ever could, clearly demonstrating that the victory was heaven's decree, not merely human strength. As daylight faded during the battle, Joshua prayed boldly, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon." Miraculously, time froze. The sun halted, shadows ceased to move, and Israel pressed the attack relentlessly. This supernatural pause allowed Israel to chase their enemies to Azekah and Makkedah, where the defeated Amorite kings hid in a cave. Joshua sealed them inside, completed the victory, then executed the kings at sunset. A solemn close to an extraordinary day, when God himself suspended nature to ensure Israel's triumph. Momentum carried Israel through a blistering southern sweep. Libnah fell in a single assault. Lachish held 2 days even, with Quezite reinforcements cut down at its gate. Eglon, Hebron, and Debir followed in rapid succession. The narrative condenses campaigns into rhythmic refrains. He struck it with the edge of the sword, left no survivor, a stylized war record typical of the ancient Near East. Archaeological layers suggest some towns were later reoccupied by Canaanites, indicating that the biblical idiom emphasizes decisive dominance rather than literal extinction. Farther north, alarm bells rang in Hazor, a royal citadel controlling Galilee's trade routes. Jabin, king of Hazor, mustered the largest coalition yet. Chariots rattled over the plains. Cavalry formed dust clouds. Infantry thick as sand on the seashore. They encamped by the waters of Merom, where reed beds whispered in pre-dawn wind. God's instruction was surgical. strike swiftly, hamstring horses, burn chariots. At dawn, Israel launched an uphill blitz. Arrow volleys hissed, slings cracked, and the coalition unraveled in chaos. Horses stumbled beneath tendon-snapping blows. Iron-clad wheels crackled in pitch-fed flames. Hazor itself was stormed and torched, unique among cities for such thorough destruction, marking it as the empire behind Canaanite resistance. The text then shifts to summary lists. 31 kings toppled from Arad's southern heights to Aphek's coastal pass. Some cities surrendered without a fight. Others endured starvation or covert infiltration. Many appear later in Judges, a reminder that conquest was a drawn-out arc, not an instant transformation. The violence of these years raises perennial questions. Earlier Torah passages indict Canaanite culture for ritual sex and child sacrifice, portraying conquest as divine judgment on entrenched evil rather than ethnic hatred. The language of total destruction employs hyperbole common to ancient war annals, evidenced by later references to surviving Canaanite enclaves and intermarriages. Moreover, Deuteronomy limits such warfare to the Canaanite corridor. Israel was commanded to seek peace with distant nations. The narratives, therefore, do not license perpetual holy war, but record a unique historical reckoning and a perilous mission to prevent moral corrosion in Israel's infancy. When main resistance collapsed, swords gave way to measuring ropes. The land was surveyed, boundaries inked onto clay, and tribal inheritances parceled from rugged Judean ridges to fertile Jezreel plains. Modern readers may skim these cadastral pages, yet for Israel, every boundary stone confirmed that promises whispered to nomadic patriarchs had matured into title deeds. Caleb, now grey-bearded but unbowed, claimed Hebron, the very district where Anakim giants once loomed, preferring unfinished challenges over complacency. Cities of refuge punctuated the map, sanctuaries where accidental killers could await fair trial. 48 Levitical towns dotted tribal territories, so that instruction in Torah remained close to every hearth. As the eastern tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, returned across the Jordan, they built a grand stone altar on the riverbank. Western Israel bristled, fearing unauthorized worship, and readied for civil war. A delegation hurried east, only to hear the altar's builders explain that it was a memorial, a witness that they too belonged to the covenant people, despite the river's dividing flow. Crisis dissolved into relief, underscoring how fragile unity could be when suspicion outpaced communication. Years slipped by, and Joshua aged. He convened the nation, first at Shiloh, later at Shechem, reciting a litany of God's deeds. Patriarchs rescued, seas split, walls leveled, hailstones hurled, chariots burned, gratitude and warning entwined in his voice. The God who fulfilled every promise would also honor every covenant clause. Idolatry would bring exile as surely as obedience had brought rest. The people vowed fidelity. Joshua erected a monolithic stone beneath Shechem's venerable oak to stand witness, then dismissed the tribes to their territories. The book closes with 3 burials binding Israel's storylines. Joshua was interred at Timnath-Serah, his allotted inheritance. A slave who died a landowner, Joseph's bones, carried from Egypt through 4 decades of wandering, finally rested at Shechem, sealing patriarchal promise to national fulfillment. Eleazar, son of Aaron, was buried at Gibeah in Ephraim, marking another generational turn in the priesthood. Even in death, the narrative stresses continuity. Leadership, land, and liturgy are planted in Canaanic soil, ready for the next act of Israel's unfolding drama. Through all the siege dust and surveyor's ropes, several threads weave the book together. God is portrayed as warrior king and covenant keeper. He hurls hailstones and topples walls, yet opens his covenant to a Canaanite innkeeper and a Gibeonite delegation. Victory is never Israel's entitlement, but always a function of trust. Jericho's silent march and Ai's initial collapse frame obedience and hidden sin as decisive factors. The land is both gift and responsibility, rest after slavery, but rest maintained only by faithfulness. Hyperbolic battle language reminds modern readers to distinguish literary convention from genocide, while the inclusion of outsiders points forward to a broader redemptive horizon. The book of Joshua thus invites readers, beginners and scholars alike, to step onto sacred soil where rivers halt, walls yield, and time itself bends around covenant promises. Its hard edges caution against moral complacency. Its bright seams of mercy welcome outsiders who turn toward truth. Its rhythms of obedience and warning echo beyond Canaan into every generation. By standing with Joshua at Shechem, we hear the timeless call, "Choose this day whom you will serve." For the God who once routed armies with hail and horn still writes history through those who listen, trust, and walk forward when he parts overwhelming waters.